Hello and welcome from the First United Methodist Church in Phoenixville, Pennsylvania, where this week the kids are doing something interesting. This is an ice cream cone. This is a marshmallow. Watch this. Ice cream cone, marshmallow. What happens if you go like this with an ice cream cone and a marshmallow? Can you do that without losing track of where it is? Can you do that without turning your hand so that it goes that way? That's an important thing to be able to do if you're going to be playing bells. And this week we have our handbell camp. We've got 10 kids that are, some of them returning, some of them new, learning how to ring a little bit of handbell music. Today was the very first day, and I want to share with you how good they already are. The person you'll see in the video is Nancy Lineberger, who is helping out and is directing them this way, showing them which notes to use. And she is one of several of the people who are helping out this week and who already knows how to do this. If you're interested in learning how to do handbells, adult or a kid, let us know. It's actually a lot more fun than you would think. Uh, that sounds horrible. I don't mean it that way. Um, Maybe I should just shut up and let the kids play their music. That song says, God is so good. God is so good. God is so good. He's so good to me. And sometimes you might play it on the marshmallow. Sometimes you might play it on the drum. But the important thing is to sing it in your heart. Let's worship, which is what that is. Hear these words from the 6th chapter of Mark. The apostles gathered around Jesus and told him all that they had done and taught. He said to them, "Come away to a deserted place, all by yourselves, and rest a while." For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure, even to eat. And they went away in the boat to a deserted place by themselves. Now, many saw them going and recognized them, and they hurried there on foot from all the towns and arrived ahead of them. As he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion for them, for they were like sheep without a shepherd. And he began to teach them many things. When they had crossed over, they came to land at Gennesaret and moored the boat. When they got out of the boat, people at once recognized him and rushed about that whole region and began to bring the sick on mats to wherever they heard he was. And wherever he went, into villages or cities or farms, they laid the sick in the marketplaces and begged him that they might touch even the fringe of his cloak, and all who touched it were healed. Recently, an article in The Atlantic reviewed a book called The Great De-Churching by Jim Davis and Michael Graham. And today I just finished listening to the book, an audiobook that I got out of the county library system. They didn't have a hard copy. They just had the e-version, which was not easy to deal with because I want to quote them, and I don't want to have to quote the article reviewing them. I want to quote the book itself. But when it's audio, I couldn't find exact spots. And honestly, I didn't have 7 hours to listen to the whole thing when there were some chapters that were more pertinent than others. Technology is good, but there are different forms of technology, and one form of technology is a standard book, a hard copy. And I look forward to reading the book in that form. It's a real balance that we face right now between older ways of doing things and newer ways of doing things. I mean, if they had a hard copy at the library somewhere in the county, I would still have had, if it wasn't right in town here or at the main branch, there's a chance I might have had to drive to the other side of the county and hope that it was still on the shelf there to get it. Instead, I could access it easily, just not for the exact purpose that I wanted it. And we go back and forth. There are pluses and there are minuses to everything. And that is actually one of the things that this book will say about the situation that churches and synagogues and mosques, any religious group in this country currently faces. And I'll come back to that. But what the basic problem we deal with right now is in the title of their book, The Great De-Churching. Here's what the review of the book says, in part. The book suggests that the defining problem driving out most people who leave is just how American life works in the 21st century. Contemporary America isn't set up to promote mutuality, care, or common life. Rather, it's designed to maximize individual accomplishment as defined by professional and financial success. Such a system leaves precious little time or energy for forms of community that don't contribute to one's own professional life or, as one ages, to one's children and their professional prospects. Workism reigns in America. And because of it, community in America, religious community included, is a math problem that doesn't add up. Now, if I had the book, it's got all sorts of charts and numbers in it. But even just listening to what I listened to and reading a review, I have to say that sounds about right to me. Again, I haven't looked at those numbers to back it up, but my gut reaction says that workism pushing everything out, and not only pushing things out, but also defining what should be in people's lives, that is a big part of the problem that we live with. When I look out and I see the congregation, I see a smaller group than there was 10 years ago. And I'm not alone at that. Even though, honestly, this congregation has done pretty well in comparison to many. But even so, there are people missing. And it isn't simply that people are just doing something else on Sunday mornings, it's why they're doing something else. To use a word that sometimes comes out scolding, and I don't mean it to be scolding, but it will sound it, and I'll run that risk. It's priorities. And it's not just the priorities that affect Sunday morning. It's the priorities that affect the rest of the week and that spill over onto Sunday morning. People spend their time, their effort, their energy trying to get ahead, or sometimes just keep up all through the week. And there are many things that put pressure on folks and make them work ridiculously long hours or spread their schedule over times that used to be sacrosanct. And I use that word consciously too, sacrosanct, holy. But they aren't anymore. There are things that are part of life that are unavoidable. I mean, student loans really do add pressure to people's budgets as they're starting out in their late 20s and early 30s. And people who need adequate health insurance and get it, as most people in this country do, through their employers, don't want to put their jobs at risk if that is a concern. And especially if they start having children, they need to have insurance for the family. And that means making sure you have that full-time job. But full-time right now usually means full-time plus. And people who are working ridiculously long hours or sometimes juggling multiple jobs or who are involved in the gig economy, they need at least one morning a week to get some kind of rest. And guess which turns out to be the only morning available? The whole workism culture, atmosphere, is very much a part of people's lives, so much that we don't even really think too much about it anymore. And in fact, one of the things that bothers me sometimes is the fact that I think we have allowed that atmosphere to come into the church too. And our answer to the question, where are all the folks, is generally to do more, to set up one more program, to create one more small group, to offer one more ministry, asking people to fit one more thing into their schedule and trying to fit one more thing into our own. Now, don't get me wrong. Please do not get me wrong. We should be paying attention to one another's situations and to the legitimate needs of the people around us. And sometimes we address them in organized ways that require or ask or offer something at a given time and for a specific amount of time. But when we do that, again, we're playing by the rules of the culture that creates the problem. I'm not saying there's an easy way out of this. but it's there. What we do when we offer all those things, we do because we do care about the people who genuinely need, one way or another, and sometimes in very specific and identifiable ways, to experience the grace of God. But when we try to do that, how do we measure it? How do we measure the success? And I think far too often we measure it by quantity rather than quality. The hardest challenges, too, come when Jesus' followers take his mandates the most seriously and start doing the things that he asks, loving our neighbors, and doing it in identifiable ways, visiting the sick and the ones in prison, feeding the hungry, clothing the naked or the people who are lonely, going to them, finding something that helps people connect, not only to one another, but to God. And when we do that, even more than saying to people, okay, give us an hour and we can do this for you or help you do it. When we do that, the people that are doing those things, getting things organized, we're asking even more time of them. You know, Jesus faced a similar situation. Listen to how he handled it. The apostles gathered around Jesus and told him all that they had done and taught. And he said to them, "Come away to a deserted place all by yourselves and rest a while." For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. And they went away in the boat to a deserted place by themselves. Now, Mark also tells us that people saw where they were headed and got there before them. And the time that they expected that they would have, it sounds like they didn't really get. But it isn't just that Jesus was saying, let's go on retreat, let's take a day off, even if that was where the discussion began. I think he was getting at something even deeper than that. Yes, take the time. Every human being needs it. But there is also a kind of point where both Jesus and his apostles, his disciples, his followers, his friends, had to detach themselves from the pressures, not of what was going on in the world, not of the need, but the pressures of the world's standards. If they were going to present, as they did, God's answers to the world's disorder and the world's impatient and chaotic demands. Jesus, in his teaching, and people were going to hear him teach, that was one of the things that was taking up his time. That was part of his ministry and a meaningful part of it. And one of the things he said was, "Come to me, all you that are weary and are carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. It's important to find the joy in the serving. It's important to pace yourself. It's important to be able to say, Lord, I'm overwhelmed. Will you lift the load for a while? Lord, what we're doing together. I'm not doing this alone. Jesus presents all of us with truth about ourselves and truth about the world, as well as the truth about God. And one of those truths that we forget or ignore or just never really realized is that we make more choices than we realize, and that they are wider than we realize. And when we look at what the world is doing and its effect on us and its effect on the community, the religious community, yes, clearly, but the entire community, even though it doesn't necessarily realize it, will feel the effects too. And what he shows us is when he says, "Come to me, and I will give you rest," is that it is possible to step off the treadmill. It is possible to slow down. But again, it involves making a choice and choosing a way other than the normal, respectable way of the world. And it has consequences that go with it. It may mean less income. It may mean doing work that has a lower social status. It may mean uncomprehending questions or criticism from family and friends. It may mean having a twinge of envy when the neighbors go away for 2 weeks every January to someplace warmer, and you're stuck in the cold rain, the ice, and the snow. And worse yet, it might mean wondering how you exactly are going to save up enough for the years when work won't be possible any longer. Of course, if people are spending on those showy things right now, the things that give people the status, the things that are showy, they may not be saving up the money that they will need in the future either. To slow down and to step away from the world's way of doing things could very well mean that we also have to step away from those institutional and analogs, parallels to the common measure of success as a church. Where the people might have to become a less important question. Not saying it isn't important, it is. But is it as important a question as what kind of people are we who are here? What kind of people are we urging others to become when we invite them to go along with us in following Jesus? It might mean that we as a whole church, not just a local church, but churches generally, might have to give up what I see going on all over the place too, which is the idea that if you're not a mega church, that you're not quite there, that something must be missing or wrong. And the aspiration to become the sort of community large enough that somebody can easily blend into the woodwork and just be there without really being there. That may need to be examined very closely and weighed very carefully, because there are spiritual costs to the individualism that is involved in that kind of outlook. At the end of my sermon last week, I read a comment by John Bright to the effect that after centuries of slowly increasing faithlessness, centuries, it was only when Israel and Judah reached a breaking point and went into exile that they were able to hear the words that God had been speaking to them through his prophets long before that moment. It was only when they had lost the normal way of doing things, the usual, the ancestral, the cultural ways of worship and of gathering. It was only when those things were gone that they were able to claim God's word to them. And that, as Bright said, Israel's faith received a new access of life. This week, I want to share a word of hope that comes from the end of the article that I quoted earlier. And I think it has to do with the same kind of process, not of going off into a political or physical exile, but of realizing that in losing some things, we may gain far more. From this magazine, The Atlantic, from Jake Medder's review of The Great De-Churching, come these words. The Great De-Churching could be the beginning of a new moment for churches. A moment marked less by aspiration to respectability and success, with less focus on individuals aligning themselves with American values and assumptions. We could be a witness to another way of life, outside conventionally American measures of success. Churches could model better, truer sorts of communities, ones in which the hungry are fed, the weak are lifted up, and the proud are cast down. Such communities might not have the money, success, and influence that many American churches have pursued in recent years, but if such communities look less like those churches, they may look more like the sort of communities Jesus expected his followers to create. And that is something to think about. Marshmallows. God is good. Amen.